I'm Regina Campbell with the Campbell Law Group, and we're coming today to talk to you a little bit about another how-to series. Today we've selected a topic within the business law realm, also considered employment law, but for the most part a lot of this is kind of involved within the business law. And it's basically how to create effective company policies. They wrote it on the board for me to make sure that I would get it right, and I still had to look. But in any case, we will talk about effective policies, and I'll help you put them together. That's what this series is about. Hopefully, we're going to give you some ideas on how to do so. So every company is different. So the first thing we want to think about when we're creating effective company policies is what policies specifically does your company need? Are you a large company? Do you have hundreds of employees? And in which case you want to consider also an employment handbook that encompasses numerous company policies that talk about everything from workman's comp, what to do in a harassment, what to do, what kind of uniforms you're supposed to wear, disciplinary measures, the FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act, and other potential acts that will apply to a company of that size. Okay, so that's rule number one. You kind of want to pick out what type of company, what do you need? What does your specific company need? You may also be a company that's highly, has heavy equipment, a construction company, or some type of other type of, a business that has heavy machinery. So also, if you are a digital company, you want to consider potential, not just, safety and data protection policies, but also policies related to privacy, working, using your computer for personal use. You want to think about a couple of other things and potentially limit also what people might be able to do internally for fear of maybe data theft and other things that might be going on. There's also another consideration that we just touched upon a little bit before, and that's basically as your company grows, you need to be cognizant of that you have additional acts potentially that may apply to you. So for instance, at certain points, other acts may govern your company, such as the American Disabilities Act, and in which case you should create a policy for that as well, and in indicating how the company will attempt to accommodate any person with a disability, and basically walk through the procedures and the requirements of what the act requires the employer to do. Of course, there are some things that an employer can do that are not required by law, but it's just it's what they choose to do. They might choose to give someone additional leave or additional paid leave, so additional paid time off. Some companies recognize lunch breaks. I know that sounds funny, but it's in Florida, it's not necessarily required. Some will pay you for lunch. Sometimes some people will pay you not just for jury duty or bereavement, but they may actually pay bereavement beyond your initial family. They may actually pay bereavement for extended family deaths. There's different policies. There's different strokes for different folks, so to speak. So it just really depends on not just also what the law requires, but what your company has offered your employees or what it wants to, the type of environment and benefits that it's creating. But to give you a couple of examples of some simple policies, the way to create them effectively that's going to be considered or contained in most companies' policies, or should be, is for instance an overtime or an hourly wage type policy describing how you figure out time worked. Upon clocking in, you are paid through lunch hour, you're relieved during lunch hour, and you should leave your desk during lunch hour since you're not going to be paid. If you remain working, for instance, during lunch, we will pay you. If you work more than 40 hours, we are going to be paying hourly, employees overtime wages at a time and a half. You also want to contain in those type of policies where the employee needs to seek permission in writing first before working any overtime hours. So you put the onus on the employee to request that, so it's not sort of a free-for-all, which unfortunately does happen sometimes, particularly when you have remote workers. So you want to just put a little bit of parameters there and guidance there. And in which case you can also hold an employee to that policy if they haven't done it and they come to you and they say, wow, you haven't paid my overtime for 3 weeks. You can say, well, we weren't even aware that you worked overtime. The policy is you're required to seek approval to work overtime in writing beforehand. I still would recommend you pay an employee. If they say they are working, depending on the circumstances, you want to weigh out the situations. If an employee disobeys the policy but actually did work, you're still required to compensate them, but you may want to give them a warning and tell them they're not allowed to do that again if they did violate a policy. You also want to show what's tardy. Is tardy, you're not at your desk, you have to, you're not at your desk ready to work exactly at 9 o'clock, or do you give them a leeway of you have to be ready to work at your desk by 9:05? Anytime after that, it's considered tardy. You may say, wow, that really sounds very nuanced and a lot of minutia, but it can make a difference when you're trying to, for instance, if you have to potentially take disciplinary action with an employee and say, you're always late. Well, what is late? What is tardiness? I'm sitting at my desk at 9 o'clock, but maybe they're not even ready to go till 9:30. You're going to have a hard time holding them accountable unless you have a policy that's very specific, to address those needs. So other examples of things you may want to have, of course, is a workman's comp sort of policy or instructions that might also be contained potentially within the safety sort of policies or procedures, where, for instance, you might indicate that, depending on if you're a biotech company or some type of, heavy machinery company, indicate the policies, maybe look at industry norms and see what safety procedures should be followed before they commence work, what kind of preparation work should be done, what kind of equipment they should be wearing, limit where they can go unless they're wearing the equipment. These type of things you want to make sure are put into a policy, and of course, leaning onto industry norms also, or potentially other guidelines that have been put together. Also, OSHA is very good for these type of sort of recommendations. You can create a company policy that suits your particular company's needs and how your company operates, including your employees. Okay, a lot of times the workman's comp information will be in there so that your employee knows how to file a workman's comp claim. Also knows the procedures for reporting injuries, especially serious injuries. Immediately call 911. Supervisor must be told. So there's a procedure in place as to how to handle those type of circumstances. It's not chaos if something should occur, and unfortunately that can cause an employee to have further injury or someone else be injured or something get missed that could have been avoided. So it's important to have these policies in place, and I think your employees will appreciate it as well when they have some guidance in these areas. Okay. Other examples of effective policies that are usually needed with companies are data, sort of computer security and data type of policies. It's very important to work with your IT professional, whether it's internal or external. Talk to them about the different level of employees that you have. Managers might have need a certain level of access. Certain employees need a certain level of access to parts of maybe client information or sensitive information, but not to everything as a manager may need. And you may have someone that is more administrative that only needs access to documents that they may be assisting, for instance, their officer with, or their vice president with, or someone that they're aiding basically, but they don't need access to the entire company's file information. This is also very important to make sure you're keeping security protocols together. So if someone does steal data, you can show that you attempted to implement protocols and procedures in place to protect the data because it was sensitive at different levels. This will help with any kind of misappropriation of secrets or trade secrets or company information type of lawsuits. Also, it'll limit the ability for someone to, if they come through someone's account, to be able to access other parts, all aspects of the company's data and information. Also having a phishing policy in place. Basically, that requires the employee to immediately report if they think they touched or they hit a link that they shouldn't have, or if something looks weird, to immediately follow up on it, because it's very important to catch these things timely, as unfortunately a lot of companies are learning nowadays. So, these are some examples. I mean, like I said earlier, if you're a larger company, you might have, a Family Medical Leave Act, policy in place, and you might describe what type of either injuries or family circumstances or illnesses actually qualify for leave under that act, how it works, how you tabulate when you can leave, the procedure in place for notifying the employer that you're going to need to take this type of act. Know your rights also. So there's also other type of acts that will, of course, apply, and having these policies will allow employees to have more clarity and transparency and create a better environment in general for your employees, for you as a company. And also keep in mind, a lot of these policies might actually apply to vendors or independent contractors, which might also include non-solicitation policies, non-competes, which also can apply, of course, to employees, although there's a new executive order out that's somewhat intending to limit non-competes at this time, although it's not clear to what effect or to what extent that's going to take place. I'm sure it's probably going to be challenged in the courts. However, if you do have, I still recommend you put non-competes where necessary, and do not restrain employees that do not need to be restricted from working if they leave your company. Usually non-compete and non-solicitation sort of provisions are really to protect something that is that you've created out of your own blood, sweat, and tears, your company has, and that it cannot easily be obtained by somebody else. It's created by you paying an employee to create this or go find out these particular nuances of clients or methodologies for software, whatever it may be. So we want to be judicious, so to speak, when we use those type of provisions, but they are important to have. They're important to have return, make it clear, what property belongs to the company. Also, if you're hiring any independent contractors or employees that do intellectual property, you want to make sure you have a work for hire, so to speak, sort of provisions that makes it clear who owns the rights to anything that's been created. People automatically assume that if they just pay someone to, do a creative or do artwork or anything of that nature, that they own the product, and that may not be the case. Of course, always careful at any kind of contract that you're signing as well, to make sure that the opposite sort of default's not in place, that the artist basically retains the right to the works, if you're intending to purchase all the intellectual properties with the work that you're paying. So, a couple of tips. Hopefully it's helpful to help you create effective company policies. More than anything, you need to know your company, and you also have to keep in mind you have to check these at least once a year to make sure that these policies do not need to be updated, or you do not need new policies, whether because of a change in law or a change in clients, employees, patterns, anything of that nature, basically, because a company is definitely a living thing that grows, that expands and contracts, and needs to be watched over to make sure that things still make sense, so to speak, and fit. So hopefully this has been helpful. I want to thank you for joining us here today. If you haven't seen any of our other how-to series or podcasts, please go take a look at our YouTube channel, become a subscriber, and hopefully there's other how-to series that might be helpful, or even podcasts that might be helpful. Also, we welcome you to become a subscriber of our Apple Podcast site, and we hope you will join us on our social media network. And for more information, the latest information on business and family law matters. And I want to thank you again. Thank you so much.